Since the dawn of time, the Psalms have been sung as songs of faith, poems of pain, and celebrations of hope. For many, they are merely lyrical expressions of pious men. But what if behind their poetic beauty, there was something deeper? Something that pulses between the lines, like a whisper coming from another dimension. Imagine that each verse is more than inspiration, that it is a coded fragment of a sacred language, transmitted not only to be read, but to be deciphered. This is the provocation that guides our journey today. Do the Psalms hide a sacred language that Jesus knew, and perhaps used to awaken the dormant divinity within us? Many scholars and mystics suggest that the Psalms carry a hidden power, a primal vibration. For centuries, Kabbalists, theologians, and even linguists have pored over their verses seeking patterns, repeated messages, numerical rhythms, and hidden codes. The Jewish tradition, guardian of these texts, considers them more than religious literature. They are formulas for connection between the human and the divine, channels between the visible and the invisible world. Behind their simplicity, they hide layers of wisdom that only reveal themselves to those who listen with the heart and not just with the eyes. This view gains strength when we observe the use of Psalms by Jesus himself. At crucial moments in his life, such as on the cross, for example, he did not recite common phrases, but specific verses from the Psalms. Why? Did he know the precise impact those words would have? Was he activating an ancient language, perhaps even predating the creation of Hebrew as we know it? And furthermore, why did the evangelists make a point to record exactly these words, even when they did not make complete sense outside of their original context? The answer may lie in the nature of the sacred language. When we observe the Psalms in Hebrew, we notice an extremely meticulous construction, strategic repetitions of sounds, parallelisms that resonate almost like rhythmic beats, cadences that remind us of breathing and pulsation. This is not by chance. This literary form known as Hebrew parallelism can be seen as a vibrational transmission code. The Psalms were not just written, they were chanted. And as modern science has demonstrated, sound not only moves matter, it shapes reality. The verb creates, as Genesis says. And Jesus knew this. At this point, we need to reflect on a central concept in Jewish tradition, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is the only Lord. This is not just a devotional phrase, it's a call, a password. Hearing is more than just listening to sounds. It's capturing the vibrational essence of something sacred. The Psalms, in this context, become living expressions of the Shema, rhythmic structures designed to awaken dormant spiritual layers, and those who knew how to chant them correctly accessed profound spiritual realities. Another element that reinforces this thesis is the presence of the Tetragrammaton, the unpronounceable name of God, subtly embedded in the Psalms. YHWH, 4 letters that vibrate in a unique pattern. Many Kabbalah scholars assert that these 4 sounds represent the 4 elements of creation, the 4 worlds of existence, and even the 4 directions of the human spirit. And the Psalms contain, in their meter and repetition, formulas to invoke this presence. Is it a coincidence that Jesus often isolated himself to pray and, in times of crisis, recited specific verses from the Psalms? Or was he literally aligning his vibration with that of the source? It's important to remember that in ancient Hebrew tradition, writing and speaking were not separated. Each letter had not only a sound, but a numerical value and a spiritual symbol. In other words, reading a psalm was not just about understanding its literal meaning, it was about resonating with its essence. The recitation became a ritual, and the psalms, tools for inner transformation. This knowledge, partly preserved by rabbis and mystics, may have been fully integrated by Jesus, who not only knew, but embodied the word. Many forget that for the Hebrew people, the Psalms were more than liturgical texts. They were maps. Maps of the soul, of human suffering, of reconnection with God. When Jesus quotes Psalm 22 on the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" He is not merely expressing despair, he is activating a code. That psalm, when read in its entirety, describes not only pain, but victory. It is an embedded prophecy, a camouflaged announcement for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. Another fascinating point is that certain psalms were sung at specific times in the Hebrew calendar. This indicates that there was a harmony between time, sound, and spirituality. Each verse, each note, had its place in the cosmic cycle. And Jesus, as a rabbi and spiritual teacher, deeply understood this synchrony. When he retreated to pray, he may have done more than simply offer prayers. He may have intoned the Psalms as keys to open spiritual portals, portals that gave him strength, guidance, clarity. And here we delve into one of the most intriguing aspects, the Psalms as Hebrew mantras. In the East, mantras are sacred syllables repeated to generate elevated states of consciousness. But what if the Psalms were exactly that for the Western tradition? What if each carefully structured sentence was a vibrational key? It's not hard to imagine that Jesus, the master of the Word, used these keys with mastery, and that his original disciples understood this intuitively, even if history has silenced these practices. Finally, it is essential to reflect on what all this might mean for us today. If the Psalms contain a vibrational code, if Jesus used them as sacred language, if each verse is a frequency, then we are not simply facing poetry, we are facing a forgotten spiritual technology, a language lost not in time, but in consciousness. Rediscovering it could be the path to reconnecting with ancient wisdom, with knowledge that not only informs, but transforms. And perhaps, just perhaps, all this has been within our reach all along. The image of Jesus on the cross is one of the most iconic in human history. However, there is a deeply mysterious detail that goes unnoticed by many. In his final moment, he not only spoke with God, he quoted a psalm. It wasn't a random phrase or a common expression of pain. It was the beginning of Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me?" The choice couldn't be random. Within this quote lies a call, a spiritual password, and perhaps a deliberately coded message for those who knew how to listen beyond the obvious. Jesus, in the midst of agony, was indicating a hidden path, that of the sacred language embedded in the Psalms. Psalm 22, when read in its entirety, reveals not only the pain of someone afflicted, but an almost surgical description of the events of the crucifixion. It speaks of pierced hands and feet, exposed bones, mockery from enemies, and the division of clothes, elements that coincide with the accounts from the Gospels. But this psalm was written hundreds of years before Jesus was born. How is this possible? The answer may lie in understanding that the Psalms are not just predictions or laments. They are spiritual molds, archetypes of human and divine destiny. By reciting it, Jesus was aligning himself with a much older vibrational pattern. This raises an inevitable question. Did Jesus know the hidden codes of the Psalms? And further, did he use them intentionally to provoke spiritual, healing, or even prophetic effects? The answer gains strength when we study the role the Psalms played in Jewish religious education. Hebrew boys learned to read from them. But in the case of Jesus, his spiritual depth indicated something beyond the norm. He seemed to not only know the words, but to channel their power. When healing, when casting out demons, when calming the sea, his words carried weight, vibration, authority. He spoke as one who has authority, the Gospel said. In this regard, it is worth highlighting the connection between Jesus and the Jewish mystical tradition. Many scholars speculate that Jesus had direct contact with groups such as the Essenes, communities that lived apart from society, guarding secret teachings. The Essenes placed great value on the Psalms, but not as simple hymns, rather as texts for spiritual initiation. There are indications that they used the Psalms in their purification, meditation, and energy alignment rituals. They saw each verse as part of a divine construction. And if Jesus was educated or influenced by this current, his way of dealing with the Psalms could never be accidental. The use of Psalms by Jesus during the most critical moments of his life, not just during the crucifixion, but also in his teachings, strengthens this hypothesis. In the Sermon on the Mount, for example, many verses have direct echoes from Psalms. When he speaks of the humble inheriting the earth, or of the purity of heart as the path to seeing God, he is reinterpreting ancient verses with a new perspective. Jesus does not reject the past, he reveals it under a new light, and the Psalms, as the foundation of this past, become an essential tool in his mission. Another striking detail is the way he referred to the scriptures. He would say, "It is written," but instead of mechanically repeating the text, he would expand its meaning. Jesus had the ability to touch the core of the spiritual meaning of the text, going beyond the letter. This is directly linked to the idea that sacred language is not fixed. It pulses, expands, and reveals itself according to the inner vibration of the reader or chanter. In this context, the Psalms became for him not just words, but spiritual bridges between the human and the divine. And so we arrive at a dimension often forgotten, the power of sound vibration. In ancient Hebrew, each word has multiple levels of meaning. Depending on the intonation, the context, even the body movement, the same verse can carry different dimensions. Jesus, as a master of the word, knew this. When he chanted a psalm, he was not just speaking, he was activating specific frequencies that could generate healing, peace, enlightenment. That's why, after his words, the sick were healed, the desperate found comfort, and the dead even returned to life. The sound carried the spirit. This perspective is reinforced by the tradition of the language of power, an ancient concept in Judaism, which believes that certain words, when pronounced with purity and intention, release spiritual forces. The Psalms are filled with these expressions. Words like hesed, mercy, shalom, peace, ruach, spirit, are at the same time sounds, concepts, and energies. Jesus knew this. When he said peace to a storm or rise to a paralytic, he didn't use words randomly. He vibrated the essence of healing, tuned in with the primordial language, and the miracle happened. The early followers of Jesus also understood this language. In the first centuries of Christianity, the Psalms were recited at virtually all community gatherings. They knew there was something alive in these verses. It wasn't just tradition, it was spiritual practice. The Psalms nourished faith, renewed the mind, adjusted the heart, and many accounts indicate that reciting them with faith produced healings, deliverances, and mystical experiences. The sacred language stayed alive through those who chanted it with reverence and love. It's interesting to note that this practice began to fade when institutional Christianity took hold. The Psalms started to be viewed as liturgical texts, not vibrational portals anymore. Mysticism was gradually replaced by dogma, and the living sound by formal reading. But traces of this ancient language remain, and today, with the help of archaeological discoveries, Kabbalah, linguistics, and neuroscience, we are rediscovering this ancient knowledge, a knowledge that Jesus seems to have mastered like no one else. For all these reasons, the question that titles this section cannot be ignored. Did Jesus intentionally use the Psalms as a sacred code? Given so much evidence, the answer seems not only possible, but inevitable. He not only knew the scriptures, he made them resonate. Each word was a bridge, each sentence a password, and each psalm a spiritual score written in invisible notes that, when sung with the heart, reconfigure the soul and the world around. Deep down, perhaps the Psalms are not just ancient words. Maybe they are sounds from another reality, translated into human language. And Jesus, as the incarnate Word, came not only to speak, but to remind us of the original language, the one that still pulses in every verse, waiting for someone to pronounce it with consciousness and truth. And maybe that someone is you. For centuries, the Psalms have been sung by kings, prophets, and believers seeking comfort. But few knew that beyond the poetic beauty and spiritual strength, there was something more subtle hidden between the lines, a numerical code. Each Hebrew letter has a value, therefore each word carries a specific numerical frequency. This practice, known as Gematria, is not superstition, it is an ancient spiritual science, and it is precisely in it that we now delve to understand how Jesus, by quoting certain verses, could be activating invisible forces through sacred numbers. Gematria is one of the central tools of Kabbalah. In it, letters become numbers, and numbers transform into keys. For instance, the Hebrew word for life, chai, has the numerical value of 18, and that's why this number is considered auspicious to this day in Judaism. But when we apply this logic to the Psalms, we start to notice repetitions, symmetries, and numerical relations that are not a product of chance. Verses with the same gematria value reveal parallel messages. Specific words that appear multiple times in symmetrical patterns reveal a deliberate architecture, as if each psalm were a temple built with blocks of mathematical energy. Jesus, as a profound scholar of the Scriptures, would have full access to this knowledge. Even though the Gospels do not directly mention his use of gematria, the signs are there. The choice of certain words, the moments when he speaks, the numbers involved in his miracles, all of this suggests a connection with something greater. The multiplication of the loaves, for example, involves symbolic numbers: 5 loaves, 2 fish, 12 remaining baskets, each number with spiritual weight. The Psalms, in turn, are filled with these numerical constructions, and when recited, they resonate as sacred formulas. Let's go to a simple but powerful example. Psalm 23, one of the most well-known. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." In Hebrew, the words form a balanced structure. Each line of the psalm has a number of letters and words carefully balanced. When we add up the numerical values of certain key words, we find patterns like 26, which is the value of the sacred tetragrammaton YHWH, or 72, a number associated with the secret names of God. These are not poetic coincidences, but energetic codes, and if pronounced with awareness, they can function as true vibrational keys. The understanding of numbers was so essential in the Hebrew tradition that many sacred texts were written with this principle in mind. The very name of God, Yod, He, Vav, He, holds the value 26. This number appears in various structures of the Psalms, especially in those of David, pointing to a divine signature. But it doesn't stop there. The Psalms also reveal hidden numerical patterns when observed in groupings. Psalm number 119, for example, the longest one, is structured following the Hebrew alphabet in order, divided into 22 sections, each one starting with a different letter. It is literally a spiritual alphabetical code. Another practice of gematria is to seek equivalences. That is, when two different words have the same numerical value, they are considered spiritually connected. A fascinating example is that the words song, shira, and door, delet, have similar numerical values, pointing to the idea that singing is opening spiritual portals. And where are there more songs than in the Psalms? The psalmist knew this, and Jesus, as someone who lived and taught through the vibration of the word, also knew. Every time he quoted a psalm, he was not just evoking an emotional memory, he was opening portals. When we look at the Psalms with Kabbalistic eyes, we realize that they were not only composed, they were encoded. Many verses contain acrostics, initial letters that form hidden words or messages, numerical repetitions, and symmetries that only reveal themselves through mathematical analysis. This does not make the Psalms cold or technical. On the contrary, it shows that they are poetry from a spiritual intelligence far beyond our own. A language that combines aesthetic beauty, emotional depth, and mathematical precision. A triad that Jesus understood like no one else. This integration between sound, number, and meaning is part of a larger language, often referred to as the language of creation. Kabbalists assert that the universe was created through sound, and more specifically, through the sonic combination of Hebrew letters. The Psalms in this context are like sacred formulas, expressing structures of the universe through chanted words. By declaring them, we not only communicate with God, we realign ourselves with the very structure of creation. And if this language holds such power, then Jesus, by reciting it, was literally shaping realities. Another numerical aspect in the Psalms is the sequence of the verses. Often, the divisions between chapters are not random, but follow spiritual progressions. The number 7, for example, a symbol of divine completeness, appears in structures that mark transitions, blessings, or revelations. Psalm 7, for example, is a prayer for justice, ending a cycle of judgment and revealing balance. On the other hand, Psalm 77 presents repetitions that mirror the movement of the soul between despair and the remembrance of God's deeds. Nothing is by chance. And Jesus, when choosing certain passages, knew exactly what he was activating. But the highlight of this analysis might be in the fact that the Psalms function as a source code of vibration. They are like a spiritual software where each line carries a purpose. When we chant, we decode this software with our intention and voice. Jesus, as the Word made flesh, may have come precisely to show this, that power is not only in the text, but in the vibration with which we utter it. The Psalms are the tool. Consciousness is the key. The Word is the vehicle. Faith is the energy. Today, with the advancements in neuroscience and quantum physics, we are beginning to understand that everything is vibration. That sounds can heal, shape matter, and alter mental states. And when we align this modern knowledge with the ancestral wisdom of the Psalms, we realize that we are in the presence of a timeless tool, a spiritual technology disguised as ancient poetry. And Jesus, with his mastery, used this technology with divine precision. In summary, the numbers in the Psalms are not ornaments or coincidences. They are gears of an extremely sophisticated spiritual machine, a mathematical language of the invisible, which Jesus was fluent in. And we, by reconnecting with it, have the chance to reactivate this fluency in our own lives. The Psalms were not made to be merely read. They were made to be lived, felt, and above all, chanted with awareness. Imagine for a moment that everything in the universe vibrates, that even the silence between sounds has a frequency. And now, imagine that sacred words like those from the Psalms are more than just language. They are waves of form, sound in motion, encoded energy that acts directly on the body, mind, and spirit. This is not just a mystical idea. It's a reality that science is beginning to confirm today. Sonic vibration can heal, reorganize physical structures, and alter emotional states. And the Psalms, chanted with intention, are precise formulas of spiritual vibration. Water, for example, reacts to sound. Researcher Masaru Emoto demonstrated that water molecules take on harmonious shapes when exposed to words of love and gratitude, and chaotic forms when exposed to hate or contempt. Now we are composed of about 70% water. If common words already cause these changes, imagine the impact of sacred words, chanted ritually, like in the Psalms. They not only inform, they transform. They not only move, they heal. This principle is known today as Cymatics, the study of sound as a physical form. When sounds are applied to surfaces covered with sand or water, geometric patterns emerge. The more harmonic the sound, the more beautiful and symmetrical the form. It's as if the vibration reveals the hidden language of creation. And when we apply this to the Psalms, we begin to understand them as sonic geometries, sacred formulas that were not only made to be understood, but also felt, absorbed, vibrated with the heart. Jesus seemed to naturally understand this principle. When he healed, his words carried an authority that transcended rational understanding. He would say, "Arise," and the body would obey. He would say, "Your sins are forgiven," and the soul would be restored. It was as if the sound of his voice carried encoded frequencies, capable of realigning the internal structures of the being. And where did he learn this? Perhaps from the Psalms themselves, which from an early age were part of the spiritual formation of any Jew, but for him, they were living, powerful, vibrational tools. There is a unique cadence in the Psalms. It's not just poetry, it's rhythm, it's melody, it's breath. Each verse has an intrinsic musicality, a spiritual pulse. When chanted, they resonate with the body's energy centers, known in other traditions as chakras. The ancient Hebrews didn't use this term, but recognized that certain words provoked internal changes: peace, tears, chills, enthusiasm. This is because the sacred sound acts directly on the vibrational field of the being. The Psalms were used for this, to realign the soul with the source. The temple priests knew this. The use of harps, cymbals, lyres, and psalms was not just to beautify the worship, but to orchestrate a vibrational spiritual experience. The musical instruments tuned the frequency of the space, and the psalms, sung in unison, transformed the environment into a sacred energy field. It was a highly advanced spiritual technology. Jesus, a descendant of David's lineage, the great musician and poet, carried this living heritage. He not only spoke with authority, he vibrated with intention. Recent studies show that certain frequencies can alter mental states. Sounds between 432 Hz and 528 Hz, for example, are linked to cellular regeneration and deep relaxation. Many spiritual traditions, including early Christians, used these frequencies intuitively, and the Psalms, when chanted in Hebrew and in certain scales, coincide with these vibrational ranges. This leads us to the possibility that the Psalms are, in fact, instruments of spiritual recalibration, acting on the human body's electromagnetic field. Furthermore, there is a component of spiritual breathing in the Psalms. The way the verses are written and recited induces a more calm, rhythmic breathing pattern, similar to that used in meditation practices. This rhythm reduces the activity of the brain's amygdala, responsible for fear responses, and activates the prefrontal cortex, associated with compassion, empathy, and spirituality. Jesus, when praying on the mountains, would isolate himself not only in search of silence, but to access this profound vibrational state. It was in these moments that he accessed the Father with greater clarity. Another essential point is that the repetition of certain psalms activates the subconscious. The human mind responds to repetition with programming, and the subconscious, as a vibrational field, is where beliefs and emotional patterns are stored. By repeating a psalm with intention, we are literally rewriting our internal codes. It's as if we're chanting a new software into our soul. And Jesus, as the master of the word, showed us this by citing precise passages that, beyond their literal meaning, carried a power of profound reprogramming. Today, sound therapies are rediscovering what the ancients already knew. The use of Tibetan bowls, binaural sounds, mantras, and medicinal chants is expanding because there is a collective hunger for reconnection. And the Psalms are being rediscovered in this movement, not only as religious texts, but as vibrational medicine. When used consciously, they can treat depression, anxiety, trauma, because they directly affect the fields that traditional medicine has yet to reach. And this is perhaps one of the greatest legacies of the vibrational Christ, the use of the word as a cure. In ancient communities, there were specific psalms for different intentions: protection, purification, wisdom, restoration, justice, reconciliation. Each one acted as a spiritual formula. Psalm 91, for example, is known as the Psalm of Protection, used for millennia in times of danger. Psalm 51 as a prayer of repentance and purification. Psalm 23 as a balm of comfort. When recited with faith and rhythm, they generated noticeable effects. Jesus knew this. And perhaps for this reason, when quoting psalms at key moments, he was silently teaching everyone the path to vibrational healing. Therefore, the Psalms are not just literature. They are tools for tuning in with the divine. They are keys that open portals of healing, restore internal harmony, and reconnect us with our purest essence. And Jesus, in using them, was not just comforting us with beautiful words. He was teaching us, in practice, the art of transforming sound into healing, word into vibration, faith into energy. When we chant a psalm with an open heart, we join this eternal current. We become, like him, living channels of the word that heals. Throughout sacred history, the temple has always been seen as the meeting point between the human and the divine. In Judaism, the Temple of Jerusalem represented the spiritual center of the world, the place where God's presence dwelled, where heaven and earth touched. But Jesus brought a profound revelation. The kingdom of God is within you. With this statement, he shifts the focus from the physical temple to the inner temple, and the Psalms, which for centuries were chanted on the steps of the visible temple, now take on a new role, that of sacred songs echoing within the soul. This transition from the external to the internal temple is not just symbolic, it's deeply spiritual. The psalmist already said, "Behold, you desire truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part you shall make me to know wisdom." Psalm 51:6. The idea that the human soul is a dwelling, a sanctuary, a space where the divine can inhabit, has been present since the times of David. And Jesus, in amplifying this message, invites us to listen to the Psalms not anymore as spectators, but as priests of our own spiritual temple. Each verse becomes a song of inner consecration. The structure of the Psalms reflects this inward journey. Many of them begin in lamentation, pain, confusion, and end in praise, light, and clarity. This movement is not accidental. It reflects the process of purification and reconnection. The soul, fragmented by the pains of existence, finds in the Psalms a mirror, a map, a ladder to ascend again to the sacred center of being. This cycle, from darkness to light, is the same that Jesus traverses in his messianic journey: suffering, cross, silence, and then resurrection. The song of the soul echoes in this same rhythm. In the Psalms, we find all human emotions: anger, fear, joy, hope, contrition, ecstasy. They do not deny the human experience. They embrace it, and more than that, they convey that the sacred is not outside of emotions, but within them. When David cries out, weeps, screams for justice, or celebrates in dance, he is teaching us that the temple is not built only with silence and order, but with emotional truth. And Jesus, as the Son of David, inherits this vibrant, intense, passionate spiritual lineage. He does not suppress emotions, he transforms them into gateways to the divine. That's why the Psalms resonate so deeply. They speak to a part of us that is beyond reason. They are vibrations that bypass the intellect and reach the heart, the unconscious, the spirit. In a time when many sought the sacred in external rules, Jesus invites us to find it within our chest, where the real temple is erected, even if it is in ruins. And the Psalms are the tools of reconstruction, the sacred stones that one by one rebuild our inner altar. This idea resonates in various mystical traditions. Hindus speak of the temple of the heart, Sufis of the sanctuary of the chest, Buddhists of the palace of the clear mind. All point to the same place, the interior as a sacred space. However, the Psalms are unique because they unite this inward journey with the verb, with the living word. They guide us not only through silence, but also through sound. The song of the soul is not a static silence, it is a movement. It is the prayer that pulses in the rhythm of the heart. In Psalm 84, the psalmist exclaims, "How lovely are your dwellings, Lord of hosts! My soul longs and faints for the courts of the Lord." It's a deep yearning to return to the sacred space. But this return doesn't have to be geographical anymore. Jesus shows us that the sacred is not limited to stones and walls, but manifests where there is truth, humility, and the living vibration of love. In this sense, Each intonation of a psalm is a step towards the inner sanctuary. It's impossible to talk about a temple without talking about presence, and in the Psalms, the presence of God is described as enveloping, intoxicating, transformative. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand, there are pleasures forevermore. Psalm 16:11. This presence is not something that comes from outside, but something that awakens from within. When we chant the Psalms consciously, we are not calling out to a distant entity. We are awakening the divine spark that already resides within us. The song of the soul, therefore, is a ritual of remembrance, a return to the inner home. Another notable aspect of the Psalms is that they function as archetypal mirrors of the soul. Each verse activates a dormant part of the being. There are psalms for fear, for repentance, for celebration, for silence. They are like vibrational remedies, alchemical compounds that act on the different layers of the psyche. And Jesus, by using them, showed that the path of self-knowledge involves recognizing these parts, giving them voice, and then transmuting them into divine presence. The temple is where all parts of the soul meet, and the Psalms are the soundtrack of this reunion. It's interesting to note that many of the Psalms were written in times of deep crisis. Fleeing, fallen, betrayed, David wrote songs that echoed through the centuries. This teaches us that pain is also raw material for the sacred. The temple is not built only with moments of ecstasy, but with the debris of the wounded soul. When we recite a psalm in the midst of pain, we are literally offering our suffering as incense to the inner altar. Jesus, by quoting Psalm 22 on the cross, shows us exactly this, that even the last breath can be a sacred song. In the end, understanding the Psalms as the song of the soul is to realize that each of them is an invitation to dive in, to listen, to rebuild. The temple is there, within us, perhaps in ruins, perhaps forgotten, but alive. And the Psalms are the sound of the divine hammer and chisel, carving the columns of presence anew. Jesus showed us how to enter. It is up to us to chant the verses, resonate with intention, and open the doors of our inner sanctuary, the temple that inhabits the sound, and the sound that awakens the temple. In 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave in Qumran, and the sound it made upon hitting an empty jar echoed through history. What he found there would forever change our understanding of ancient spirituality, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them were millennia-old manuscripts, many of which contained versions and commentaries of the Psalms, along with texts never seen by the mainstream Judeo-Christian tradition. But what few know is that some of these writings revealed a much closer relationship between sacred language, ritual practice, and the figure of the Messiah, a figure that the Essenes awaited and who, mysteriously, seems to align with the profile of Jesus. The Essenes were a mystical Jewish sect, separate from the official temple and religious authorities in Jerusalem. They lived in the desert, preserving texts, practicing spiritual purifications, and dedicating themselves to a life of deep inner discipline. They not only copied the Psalms but used them as initiation manuals. Certain songs found in Qumran were used at specific times in the spiritual cycle, such as rites of passage, fasts, or astrological events. For them, the Psalms were not just prayers, they were vibrational formulas to realign the spirit with the celestial forces. Among the texts found, there are alternative versions of Psalms, with words or passages that do not appear in the current Bible. This raises an uncomfortable question. Who chose what would go into the sacred canon, and why? The Council of Jamnia in the 1st century, and later the Christian councils, carefully selected the texts that would compose the known Bibles. But what about the Psalms that were left out? What did they say? Why were they silenced? Among them, there are prayers that openly discuss healing through sound, the connection between stars and songs, and the descent of the Holy Spirit as a tangible presence evoked by the sacred voice. And there's more. These alternative psalms speak of a master of justice, a messianic figure who would live among men, suffer unjustly, and bring revelations to the world. The parallels with Jesus are striking. Many scholars avoid directly associating him with the Essenes, but the truth is that Christ's lifestyle, with fasting, healing, retreat in the desert, and teachings against religious hypocrisy, is deeply aligned with the philosophy of this forgotten sect. And if he had access to the hidden texts of Qumran, his mastery over the Psalms gains a new layer of depth and intention. These manuscripts also reveal the use of psalms as dimensional portals. Each verse chanted at a certain frequency was part of a cycle of alignment with the angels, the names of God, and the elements of creation. They were used as catalysts for altered states of consciousness, something many ancient traditions were familiar with. This suggests that there was among the ancients a highly developed spiritual science that united sound, mathematics, astrology, and spirituality. A science that was buried, forgotten, or perhaps deliberately concealed. The question that strongly emerges is, why so much effort to hide these texts? The answer might lie in the power they carry. An awakened humanity, which understands that it can access the divine through its own inner vibration, becomes uncontrollable. It no longer depends on intermediaries, formal rituals, or religious authorities. It becomes a living temple, and the Psalms, when understood as spiritual technology, offer this direct path. Perhaps that's why texts speaking of this were suppressed, because they empower, liberate, and awaken. Jesus demonstrated this empowerment constantly. He would say, "The Father and I are one," and he invited others to do the same. When teaching his disciples to pray, he didn't instruct them with long rituals, but with simple and powerful words, "Our Father." It's the same essence as the Psalms: direct access, pure vibration, heartfelt surrender. If he knew the forgotten manuscripts, and there is evidence to suggest that he did, then his mission was also to bring to light this suppressed knowledge, this vibrational power capable of transforming souls and raising consciousnesses. Among the Qumran texts, there are also psalms dedicated to specific healings, even mentioning the names of the angels of divine medicine and instructions on how to invoke their presence through sound. There are sequences of words, combinations of letters, and numbered chants. All of this was swept under the rug for centuries, treated as heresy or dangerous mysticism. However, today, with the rediscovery of these texts and the advancement of frequency science, they resurface as central pieces of a larger puzzle, that of the true nature of the sacred word. The Psalms were also used in secret spiritual initiations, according to the documents found. The candidate had to recite certain verses at specific times of the day and night, synchronizing with cosmic rhythms. This was not superstition. It was attunement. It was vibrational harmonization with the universal order. Jesus, often withdrawing to pray alone, may well have followed this same model, chanting specific psalms at the right times, creating a living bridge between heaven and earth, between what was hidden and what he came to reveal. Another forgotten manuscript, the Book of Enoch, which was popular among the Essenes, describes the power of sound and words in the creation of worlds. Enoch, a man who walked with God, speaks of the music of the spheres, the singing of the angels, the divine geometry embedded in the human voice. Jesus, as the spiritual heir of this tradition, may have brought not only messages, but the mastery of the creative vibration, manifesting healings, liberations, and transformations from the living word, exactly as described in the ancient texts. Therefore, when we talk about forgotten psalms, we're not just talking about texts. We're talking about a buried spiritual memory, a vibrational science that was denied to us. We're talking about the path that Jesus knew, lived, and perhaps tried to reignite within us. A path that begins with sound, goes through the heart, and culminates in union with the divine. The forgotten manuscripts may be outside of our Bibles, but they've never been beyond the reach of our soul, They still call out. They still vibrate, waiting for someone, perhaps you, to listen to them with an awakened heart. Wisdom without application is merely information. And all the revelation we've journeyed through so far, the numerical codes, the vibrational sounds, the psalms as spiritual formulas, only truly gain strength when activated in practice, in real life, in the now. The power of sacred language does not belong solely to ancient mystics or desert hermits. It is accessible to anyone who truly wishes to reconnect with their divine essence. The question is not whether it works, but how to tap into this force in today's world. The first key is intention. When reciting or chanting a psalm, it's not about repeating words as if they were a magical or superstitious formula. The spiritual vibration is activated by the consciousness with which you pronounce each word. Sound is the vehicle, but the soul is the fuel. A psalm said with presence, breath, reverence, and openness has 1,000 times more impact than the same phrase read automatically. Therefore, before starting any practice with the psalms, align yourself inwardly. Take a deep breath, quiet your body, and enter a state of communion. The second practice is the selection of the psalm based on its energetic intention. Each psalm carries a specific frequency and can be used as a focused spiritual tool. For example, Psalm 23, for trust and inner peace. Psalm 91, for energetic protection and dispelling fear. Psalm 51, for repentance, emotional healing, and liberation. Psalm 27, for spiritual strength and facing challenges. Psalm 121, for safety and protection on one's path. These selections are not random. They resonate with deep archetypes, activating specific energy fields in the psyche and the individual's vibrational field. The third application involves the practice of conscious repetition. The ancients knew that repetition is a form of programming. By repeating a psalm daily for 21 days, you begin to reprogram your subconscious with new vibrational codes. This is also proven by neuroscience. Mental patterns are shaped by repetition, emotion, and focus. Jesus, in his teachings, repeated central ideas in different variations. He knew that truth needs to echo several times to penetrate the walls of the mind and blossom in the heart. Another vital aspect is the sound pronunciation. Although most of us read the Psalms in Portuguese, there is a profound power in the original Hebrew vibration. Even if you are not fluent, learning to pronounce certain words, such as shalom, peace, ruach, spirit, or even the tetragram in its vocal forms, Yah, Yahu, Yehovah, already initiates a vibrational alignment. Sacred sounds carry specific frequencies, and chanting them with reverence is like playing invisible instruments within you, awakening parts of your being that were dormant. Many vibrational therapists have integrated the Psalms into their practices. Sound therapies, such as the use of crystal bowls, devotional chants, rhythmic beats, or even meditation with specific frequencies, like 432 Hz or 528 Hz, gain new potency when combined with the sacred verses. Imagine chanting Psalm 23 over a harmonic bass of 528 Hz, while you consciously breathe and connect with the image of the Good Shepherd. This is not superficial mysticism, it's applied spiritual engineering. The creation of a vibrationally sacred environment is also a fundamental part of the application. Before chanting the Psalms, prepare the space. It could be a quiet corner of your house, with a lit candle, a glass of water, a light incense, or just the sound of silence. This preparation helps signal to your body and mind that you are entering a sacred space. The ancients knew that the environment shapes the internal state. Jesus withdrew to specific places, deserts, mountains, gardens, not only for isolation, but for attunement with the space. In addition to individual practice, there is a special strength when psalms are chanted in a group. The collective vibration amplifies the field. When several people chant the same psalm with a unified heart, A resonance is created that surpasses physical space and touches more subtle dimensions. This is why, historically, psalms have always been recited in congregations, celebrations, and even in spiritual battles. In times of crisis, fear, or illness, a small group can make a huge difference by vibrating in unison with these sacred words. Another contemporary tool is the creation of personal sequences of psalms adapted to your spiritual journey. You can build a vibrational path based on the themes you need to work on: healing, wisdom, protection, faith, reconnection. For example, start with Psalm 51 for purification, continue with Psalm 91 for protection, and end with Psalm 23 for inner peace. This sequence can be your daily prayer, your sacred ritual, your deep dive into the divine. And for those who enjoy recordings and guided meditations, a powerful practice is to record yourself chanting the Psalms. Listening to your own voice vibrating these words, especially upon waking or before sleeping, can lead to a profound realignment. Remember, your voice is the sound of your soul in manifestation. When you align it with the words of the Spirit, you create a direct bridge to the source. Jesus said, "My words are spirit and they are life." And yours can be too. Finally, it is important to cultivate consistency. The path of sacred vibration does not reveal itself in a solitary practice, but in a daily, living process, like a constant dance between sound and silence. The more you dedicate yourself, the more sensitive you become. You start to notice subtle changes. More peace, more clarity, more synchronicity. And as Jesus taught, it's not about showing anything to others, but about cultivating, in the silence of your room, an intimate relationship with what is eternal. The Psalms are the keys. The practice is the door. The soul is the temple. When we talk about Psalms, most people automatically think of the 150 chapters that appear in modern translations of the Bible. But what many overlook is that this collection was chosen and limited by specific religious authorities at certain historical moments. In other words, there are other psalms that were excluded, forgotten, or deliberately concealed. And what these apocryphal texts reveal can change everything we believe about vibrational spirituality, sacred language, and the true mission of Jesus. The so-called apocryphal psalms are not mere later inventions. Many of them appear in ancient manuscripts, such as those found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in versions of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures used in the times of Jesus. This means that Jesus likely had contact with some of these songs today considered outside of the canon. And if he knew them and used them, then their exclusion represents not only a historical omission, but a spiritual amputation. Among these texts, there are chants that speak of the profound aspects of the soul, the vibrational structure of the universe, and the direct action of God through the human voice. One of these psalms, known as Psalm 151, was widely accepted in ancient communities. It describes in more detail the youth of David and his spiritual anointing. And why was it excluded? Perhaps for revealing a more human and mystical vision of the king poet, connecting him not only with political leadership, but with transcendent spiritual abilities, something that is also reflected in the lineage of Jesus. Other apocryphal psalms present even more audacious content. They speak of healing songs, sound formulas to expel illnesses, invocations for alignment with the spirits of light, and even descriptions of altered states of consciousness caused by the rhythmic intonation of sacred words. In other words, they present the Psalms as advanced spiritual technology, something that sounds dangerous for religious systems that rely on control, intermediation, and fixed dogmas. After all, if the human being can access the divine directly, what remains for the intermediary? It's revealing to note that early Christians were much less restrictive regarding these texts. In the first centuries, the Psalms were recited in their full form, including songs that don't even appear in traditional Bibles today. It was common for communities to have larger collections, composed not only of canonical psalms, but also Gnostic psalms, Essene psalms, and even psalms inspired by visionary experiences of spiritual leaders. There was a spiritual freedom that was gradually pruned as the institutionalization of faith gained strength. These lost psalms often mention sound as a direct bridge between creation and the human spirit. There are references to words that move the heavens, songs that open the veils, and sound combinations that bring to earth the order of light. It is no exaggeration to say that many of them sound more like vibrational mantras than conventional poetry. Jesus, the master of the word, would certainly have understood and perhaps used these formulas. But they were suppressed, perhaps because they were too powerful, too liberating. What catches the eye is that various occult and esoteric traditions have kept this memory alive. Kabbalah, Sufism, mystical Christianity, and even some Rosicrucian lineages use excerpts from these hidden psalms as vibrational keys. Even if they were not accepted by the councils, they survived because they work. They produce effects. They provoke transformation. And in modern times, with increasing access to ancient manuscripts and more faithful translations, these forgotten pieces of the puzzle are resurfacing. And what would these psalms look like in practice? Many of them are composed of shorter verses, with rhythmic repetitions and invocations that resemble spiritual enchantments. Unlike traditional psalms that follow a narrative or outpouring, these have a more circular, hypnotic structure. They are designed to be repeated like a meditation, like an inner chant that echoes until it reaches the heart. Their function is not to inform, but to realign. They serve as vibrational fields that, when activated, elevate the soul and purify the environment. Some modern scholars, such as Neil Douglas Klotz, have dedicated themselves to reconstructing these sacred languages from the Aramaic and Hebrew roots. Their research indicates that specific words of Jesus carry sounds similar to those of these apocryphal psalms, suggesting a profound connection. Words like Abun, cosmic father, Shlemuta, deep peace, or Niwe, your vibrant will, show that there was much more than theology on the lips of Christ. There was frequency, rhythm, and resonance. Today, in rescuing these psalms, we are not merely recovering texts. We are reclaiming a living spiritual practice, a way of living and praying that goes beyond religion and touches the sacred that dwells within each being. We are relearning how to speak to God not with empty words, but with vibrations that open portals, with intonations that heal, with chants that rebuild the soul. Jesus, who quoted the scriptures with such depth, may very well have known these formulas and wished for us to know them too. Finally, the remaining question is, what if what was denied to us was precisely what would liberate us the most? What if the apocryphal psalms hold the secret of the human voice as a divine instrument, of sound as a bridge back home? We may never know all the reasons why these texts were suppressed. But one thing is certain, they still exist, waiting to be rediscovered, and more importantly, reactivated. Not with fear, but with faith. Not with dogmas, but with vibrant awareness. At the center of everything we explore, the sounds, the numbers, the hidden psalms, the vibrational practices, there is an invisible axis that connects everything. The living consciousness of the sacred word. Jesus, the Word made flesh, did not just come to teach moral behaviors or challenge religious structures. He came to remind humanity of the forgotten language, the one that vibrates before words, the one that shapes reality before it becomes sound. The Psalms are fragments of this language. They are echoes of a primordial language that is not spoken with the mouth, but with the soul. This language does not depend on religion, culture, or time. It goes beyond the boundaries of text. It manifests itself when a psalm is sung with presence, when a word is spoken with love, when the silence is so deep it turns into a verb. Jesus demonstrated this by remaining silent before Pilate, by forgiving with a simple phrase, by healing with a single command. He did not use excess, he used the essential. because the sacred language does not need ornaments, it needs truth. Each psalm, each sound that resonates in the heart, is a spark of this code. Throughout the ages, this language has been fragmented, distorted, forgotten, but it never disappeared. It remained latent in the texts, in the songs, in the prayers whispered in silence in the early hours of the soul. It stayed alive in the Psalms, these sonic maps of the human spiritual journey. And each time someone chants a psalm with awareness, a part of this code is reactivated. It's as if the letters begin to shine again, as if the sounds begin to construct realities once more. This is the true legacy of the Psalms. They are not just devotional poetry, they are tools for spiritual reprogramming. They align our vibrational field with the source, reconnect us with the intelligence of the universe, restore harmony between mind, emotion, and spirit. What's more, they teach us to speak with the divine within us, not as frightened subjects, but as awakened children. The Our Father that Jesus taught us begins with this declaration of intimacy, of access, of living code. The call to the sacred language, therefore, is not an external invitation. It's an internal whisper. It invites us to use our words as a creative vibration, to move away from the automatic, from the void, and step into the frequency of presence. To realize that every thought is a prayer, every emotion is a sound vibrating within the body. That faith is not just about believing, it's about vibrating in harmony with divine possibility. This is the code. And Jesus, by living and chanting the Psalms, was decoding this knowledge for those who had eyes to see and ears to hear. But this language can only be accessed by those who choose the path of inner silence. Superficiality, noise, and haste block the sensitivity needed to hear what is beyond form. The final invitation of the Psalms is not just to read them, it's to feel them, live them, be them. The psalmist said, "Your word is a lamp to my feet." And this lamp only lights up when we stop being observers and become participants in the light. Jesus demonstrated this fusion between word and being. He didn't just quote psalms, he embodied them. At the time of the cross, when all seemed lost, he intoned a verse that began in pain, but ended in redemption. Psalm 22 is not just a lament, it is an ascent. And this shows us that sacred language is also a path. We start in fragmentation and end in unity. We start as beggars and end as children of the Most High, aware of our vibrational heritage. This journey of reconnection involves choosing to live with intention, with vibrational awareness. The words we use daily shape our reality. When we say, "I can't," we vibrate limitation. When we say, "I am guided," we vibrate openness. The Psalms teach this deeply. Let the weak say, "I am strong." The sacred language begins with the inner verb, which transforms into the spoken verb, which manifests as the lived verb. The final code is in becoming the very vibration we wish to emit. There are no rigid formulas. What exists is availability, an open heart, a sincere desire to remember. You can start with a single psalm, chanting it daily, silently, or aloud. You can meditate on a verse, or simply breathe to the sound of a sacred word. Each practice is a door. Each door leads to a room in the inner temple, and this temple, as Jesus taught, doesn't need stone, gold, or sacrifice. It only needs presence. The final code is not something you learn, it's something you activate. When you tune into the Psalms, with the truth of the living word, with the simplicity of conscious presence, you become a channel of this forgotten language. You become a verb in motion, a song in human form. You become a bridge between heaven and earth. And this, perhaps, is the greatest miracle of all. Not that God speaks to us, but that we can learn to speak again with Him, in His own language. We've reached the end of the journey, but in truth, we're just at the beginning. The Psalms are there, the sound is there, the vibration is alive, The sacred language pulses beneath the common words, and Jesus still walks among those who chant with faith, who live with intention, who vibrate with love. The code is not lost, it lives in you. Mind unfettered, now it's up to you. After everything we've explored together, tell me in the comments, which psalm speaks most to your soul at this point in your life? Or even better, if you were to create your own psalm, what vibration would it have? Peace, healing, abundance, awakening. Let's manifest together. Write down something you wish to vibrate today. A phrase, a word, a personal code. By sharing, you not only activate your intention, but also join an egregore of awakened consciousness, right here in the Mind Unfettered community. Each comment here is a seed planted in the field of collective manifestation. Now take a deep breath and continue this journey with me. The next video is already waiting for you on the screen. The Brotherhood of Light, the secret knowledge of Jesus that history erased. There we will unveil the secret connections between Jesus and a forgotten brotherhood that dominated the true spiritual science, a knowledge that history books have tried to erase. You've already felt the call. Now, follow the trail. See you there, Mind Unfettered.